Right, well, thank you very much for coming today. I'm sorry we've got a bit of a late start, but we've had issues with Hansard. Ms Foy, I note that you've been sworn before, so we won't swear at you again. Or you won't swear at us, thank you.
No, not at all. Pleased to be here, thank you.
Mr Smith and Mr Howarth, you both need to be sworn, so could you please, maybe starting with you, Mr Howarth, please give us your full name and title and swear either an oath or an affirmation.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Frank Richard Howarth. I'm here as Chair of the New South Wales Heritage Council. I'm giving an affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And Mr Smith?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to come. Tim Smith, OAM. I've been elevated here, but I'm only a mere OAM. I'm the director.
Is it an elevation or a...
No, I think it's that's an elevation. Thank you.
I don't understand the difference. I'm sorry.
Wow.
So I'm Director of Operations at Heritage New South Wales in the Department of Premier and Cabinet. I'm here for my support to the Heritage Council in listing matters and management of issues under the Heritage Act. I've got an affirmation. I solely, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Would any of you like to start with an opening statement? No more than a couple of minutes. Mr Howarth?
Thank you, Chairman. I thought it might be useful to give a little bit of context around the role of the Heritage Council itself. The Heritage Council is an independent statutory authority. We report to the Minister responsible for heritage. The Council membership is a diverse membership representing a range of skills and expertise in the heritage area. We have two primary committees that assist the Council in its work. One is the State Heritage Register Committee, which considers applications for listing onto the State Heritage Register. And the other one has the romantic name of the Approvals Committee, and it's there to consider changes to currently listed properties. The primary responsibility of the Council is to decide on items of, and I'm quoting from the Act, environmental heritage that should be added to the State Heritage Register. In doing this, the Council considers 7 areas of potential significance as set out in the Act. To be listed, generally an item must meet more than one criteria. The Act does allow for an item to be listed on the basis of only one criteria, but as the Act states, it must be of exceptional significance under that criteria. The general process for listing is that a person or organisation lodges an application for State Heritage Register listing. It's considered by the Heritage Register Committee through a triage process which determines which application should go forward for detailed consideration. An application is unlikely to succeed if the committee determines that it's not likely to be of heritage significance, but will proceed to formal detailed assessment if the committee considers that it may be of heritage significance. The committee will give priority to applications for properties that are not adequately protected elsewhere. For example, something that is, in the committee's view, adequately protected generally would be something that's listed through a local environmental plan, or it would give priority to items that are under threat, as we did recently with the MLC building in North Sydney, or where Council is requested to do so by the Minister responsible for heritage, as we also recently did for the National Art School Old Darlinghurst Jail Complex in Darlinghurst. The Council may advise the Minister to issue an interim heritage order if the Council believes the property is under potential threat, as we also just did for the MLC building in North Sydney. It's the Minister's decision then as to whether to issue that order. The committee or full Council is satisfied that a property or place or object is likely to be of heritage significance. A notice of intent to recommend listing is issued, and comments from that process taken into account before providing a formal request to the Minister to list something. Council's Approvals Committee has the key role in deciding on requests for changes to listed properties. Many of the Council's functions are delegated to Heritage New South Wales, the team led by Tim here on my left, with the full Council and the committees generally considering more complex or controversial applications. Council's also recently considered whether the State Heritage Register is properly representative of the range of heritage that is significant in New South Wales. It's clear that some areas of heritage, such as Aboriginal cultural heritage, migrant heritage, rural heritage, and the built heritage of the mid to the late 20th century, are underrepresented. Arguably, some areas of heritage are overrepresented currently, for example, 19th century sandstone dwellings and churches, and late 19th, early 20th century railway buildings. We have a lot of those on the State Heritage Register. The Council is working with Heritage New South Wales on ways of addressing these imbalances. In this process, the Council is following the model established by museums and art galleries, where the collections are actively curated to ensure that they meet representative criteria rather than simply responding to what comes through the door. Council also aware that heritage may be referred to as living heritage is not easily able to be represented on the current State Heritage Register due to definitional limitations in the Act. In 2016, Heritage New South Wales did a survey of a representative group of the entire population and asked them about did they think heritage was significant, and the good answer was more than 85% of people rated heritage as important or very important. The interesting answer then was asking them what they considered to be heritage. A lot of people from, say, Asian backgrounds, South Asian backgrounds, Middle Eastern backgrounds, do not consider built heritage as of primary significance compared to traditions, celebrations, festivals and events. And we're currently thinking through how that might be better represented in the state heritage system. Council is also concerned about the ongoing care and management of State Heritage Register properties, and we provide advice to property owners and custodians. In particular, the Council has been considering how external events such as climate change and COVID-19 will impact on that heritage and how best to advise heritage property owners accordingly. And finally, the Council also has a strong policy of being more proactive around major state developments such as the Western Gateway Central Railway developments, Circular Quay, the Outer Sydney Orbital, where we seek to engage earlier in the process rather than simply reacting to requests, so that we work with people who are developing, as we are doing extremely well, I think, in Central with the proponents for the large developments of Central. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Anybody else? No?
No, thank you, Chair.
No? Okay. Questions?
That was a very good overview. Thank you. Maybe this is a question for Mr. Smith, actually. Okay. There's been much debate and much discussion about what is actually under heritage protection and what is protected at the powerhouse site at Ultimo. There were advertisements some time ago in the Government Gazette and in the government advertisements, and then there was debate and correspondence back and forth saying that, in fact, the government hasn't protected the site. So could you take us through what is actually protected at the Ultimo site?
Thank you for that question. Look, if I was going to have an opening address, it would just to be to reflect on the outcome of those deliberations, and they've been very considered and careful deliberations since 2019, when the original nomination from the National Trust was prioritised and put through the rigour of a State Heritage Register assessment process. It is a rigorous process because the register, as the Chair of the Council has identified, is a critical register. It is those places in the state of absolute special importance. Obviously, most places are protected and appropriately at a local level under the Planning Act through heritage schedules. So the heritage register process is a very considered one. We work through nominations. It's a public process. It's completely in the public domain. Nominations come in, they get assessed, they get a due diligence test around completeness and adequacy to then be progressed, and they go through then a process. I can talk about some refinement of that, which has been a very good outcome in the last year, where Heritage New South Wales has been working closely with the Heritage Council to improve and streamline that process and go through the open list of nominations.
Okay, but my question relates to the Ultimo powerhouse site.
The outcome.
Outcome, absolutely. So I'm sorry, what was that was trying to demonstrate there was a process. That particular nomination ran through that process from, as I said, late 2019. There are a number of Heritage Council meetings to discuss the National Trust's preferred area or nominated area. The Heritage New South Wales, as a delegate of the Heritage Council, looks at that. They present that nomination to the Heritage Council, and then the Heritage Council deliberates on the merits of that nomination out of that process.
Okay.
And what we have now realised, and I just want to also commend the Heritage New South Wales staff that supported that, we have now the heritage core of the powerhouse listed on the State Heritage Register, gazetted by the Minister, Minister Harwin,
Okay.
recently. So it's
Can I stop you there? What is the Heritage Core?
It is the principal heritage buildings that the Heritage Council, on their reflection on the values of the place, considered were the most significant in terms of telling particular stories of that place. The principal story being the historical construction of that building for electricity generation and servicing of the Sydney tram network.
Okay, can you
May I
name,
ask a question of clarification? Are you asking which
Building
buildings
elements?
constitute the heritage core?
that's what
So,
I would,
sorry, I can certainly say that. So, yeah,
I would like you to list them.
it's a turbine hall, the boiler house, the switch house, and the engine house and the office. So they're similar to what's protected, was already protected by the local City of Sydney LEP listing. So I say the principal core because they are the substantive elements of the original powerhouse site.
Mr. Smith, did I understand you to say that the Heritage Council considered all of the site and decided to protect only the principal heritage buildings? Was that your evidence?
That was part of the process, absolutely. The nomination was only for those elements that ultimately were gazetted and endorsed on the recommendation of the Heritage Council by the Minister. But the Heritage Council and also Heritage New South Wales in examining that, doing a proper due diligence assessment of the wider values of the site, also looked at the wider elements of the site, commissioned external studies, drew on other existing reports that presented particular views on values and which elements had values for different stories on the use of that site and its transition.
Yeah, you see, Mr. Smith, you weren't at the meeting of the Heritage Council on the 21st of April when it was decided, were you? You're on standby.
That's right, the Heritage Council determined that out of session.
Yeah, and have you read the minutes
Yes.
of the Heritage Council?
Yes, certainly they considered the nomination before them, which was this 2015 National Trust one, and then part of that process, because since in the interval of that nomination coming through and going through the system, the National Trust certainly landed some additional nominations, one for the Harwood building and one for the whole site in its entirety. And the Heritage Council, I don't want to speak for the Heritage Council, framed up a view that they would look at the initial nomination, consider that, and then leave open the opportunities to reassess other elements.
Well, you see, Mr. Smith, I don't think your evidence is actually an accurate reflection of what the Heritage Council did on the basis of the minutes. And I'll read you a section from the minutes, and then I might ask Mr. Howarth to comment as to whether or not those minutes are accurately reflect the deliberations. The minutes read, in part, the submissions indicated that there may be significance in associated buildings, bracket Ran, comma Harwood, bracket, and specifically associated collections, bracket steam and transport elements, bracket. And these need to be investigated. Until that happens, the Heritage Council cannot make a determination on likely significance of the rest of the site, but will foreshadow to the Minister that investigation may result in an expansion of curtilage, bracket, and possibly significance, bracket. Now, Mr. Smith, that is contrary to your assertion that the Heritage Council looked at all of the buildings and decided only to protect the principal heritage buildings. It's actually directly contrary to your evidence, isn't it?
Sorry, may I just ask, through the chair, may we just have a look at that document before Mr. Smith responds? I don't think we have it on us.
I was certainly flagging
Mr. Smith, you said you read the minutes, so...
Yes,
If we could have a look at it, that would be really
I'm happy
helpful.
to share the document, but I'd like Mr. Smith to respond.
I thought I alluded to the fact the other nominations had come in and they were going to be assessed at a later stage, and that goes to your point where the Heritage Council left, particularly the finding of the modernist element, the 1988 Rand building elements, that they absolutely did consider. They didn't get a consensus view, and again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the members of that committee, but they
weren't there, Mr. Smith.
they determined to progress what they had consolidated as meeting a state test and to look at the other elements of the site at a later stage. So that is an
Mr. Howarth, do the minutes fairly and honestly reflect the deliberations of the Heritage Council?
My recollection is yes, they do.
And did the Heritage Council look at all of the buildings on the site and determine only to protect the principal heritage buildings?
The record in the minutes is the accurate record. The upshot of it was the Minister accepted a recommendation to list the core buildings, and that's what's the situation now.
but the Heritage Council wasn't in a position to assess the heritage significance of the Ran and the Harwood buildings because they didn't have sufficient information before them. That would be a fair reflection, wouldn't it?
Yes, I'm assuming the committee was aware from the currently published resolutions that the Heritage Council has considered the Harwood building at its most recent meeting and decided that it was not of state heritage significance. With respect to the Ran building, we're waiting on a commission study that's being processed by Heritage New South Wales to look at the architecture of the last part of the 20th century so that the Ran building can be put in some context of the wider postmodernist, in particular, architecture across the state.
And in fact, it's a part of the state's heritage that is inadequately protected, that late 20th century architectural heritage. It's part of what you said has been given inadequate protections.
No, what I said was it's underrepresented on the State Heritage Register, was my exact words. And the study is to determine if there are buildings of significance in the latter part of the 20th century, and in specifically where the Ran building, as it's called, sits within that particular canon.
I'm not asking you to prejudge this particular building, but it's in that historical epoch, if you like, that is currently underrepresented in terms of the state heritage.
Yes.
Is it? You asked for further investigation of both the Harwood and the Ran buildings. I think you indicated you'd formed the view that the Harwood building shouldn't have state protection.
Yes.
But you're not suggesting it's without heritage merit, are you?
I think I'd probably refer you to the published draft resolutions, but my recollection of those is that we resolved to recommend that Sydney City Council look at potential local listing of the Harwood building, but that's up to the council.
Yeah. And I'd just ask you whether implicit in that is local listing would suggest that you accept that there's heritage value to the building, you just don't think it ticks the box for state listing. Is that
we think it doesn't tick the box for state listing. I'm not going to go into sort of relative value judgments beyond that.
And in terms of the Ran building, what's the time frame for completing the Heritage Council's consideration of the state heritage listing of the Ran building?
It will be determined by that study. One of the problems is finding people who are both available and skilled enough to do that study. I would hope we would have some resolution by early next year on that.
Have you been in communication with Infrastructure New South Wales or the Powerhouse Museum about the timeframe for their business case and whether or not heritage listing, the question of heritage listing of the Ram building needs to be done in a time for their business case?
No, we haven't, nor has any formal advice or any informal advice, so far as I'm aware, been provided on those from those agencies on those issues.
And before I hand over to Mr. Secord, do you think in terms of the custodianship of a building that is up for consideration of state heritage listing, that before the owner makes a major decision about removing fabric or altering fabric, that good practice would be to wait for the conclusion of the deliberations of the Heritage Council on state heritage listing? Would that be your advice to most owners?
I'm not going to provide hypothetical advice here. It's up to proponents to decide which way they want to jump.
Well, Mr. Howarth, this is not hypothetical. We're being told that the business case is currently being developed. And we heard earlier today that they're developing an amended conservation management plan for the site, which includes the Ran building. That's happening as we speak.
People can walk and chew gum at the same time, David.
Well, I'm just asking from a heritage perspective whether you would endorse the prospect of revising the conservation management plan whilst there's an outstanding assessment for state heritage listing and you've got consultants in the field.
I'm not going to give a professional view on a hypothetical like that. It's something the council would consider if it's formally asked. Or even formally asked for advice, but we haven't been, so I'm not going to provide a view.
David?
I can provide some additional information if that's helpful.
By all means, Ms. White.
So as part of the final business case and the master planning, we've engaged heritage consultants to review the current CMP, and we've engaged, and they're also engaged to prepare a new draft CMP. Obviously, the benefit of having heritage and arts in the one portfolio means that we can be considered and take into account those types of interacting issues. So certainly we would have regard and be thinking about and conscious of any potential heritage issues as part of a master planning process, so that we are, any future planning will be absolutely considerate, and that we have options to be able to present to government that doesn't offend any of our own planning, heritage or other policies or legislation.
See, we should have had Ms. Foy here this morning with Ms. Havila.
Well, we can have that discussion in
The
another
Heritage
place.
Council have a slightly different role as it comes to that. So we undertake the heritage studies that we're required to do. When it comes to matters of listing and assessment, we would hand that to the Heritage Council. I just want to emphasise Mr Howarth's point earlier that they are independent, so we don't seek to have negotiations about these things. We let them go about their business independently, with support from Heritage New South Wales.
Have you provided, Mr Smith, have you provided the Heritage Council, noting the two roles, both heritage and arts, in the same organisation, have you provided to the Heritage Council the requested advice on the perceived potential conflicts of interest for situations where the minister or department responsible for heritage is also the minister or department responsible for a property being considered for listing or for approval for work under Section 60? Have you provided that advice to the Heritage Council?
I haven't directly in my role, but that I understand there was advice. The question was raised by the council in its deliberations, just as due diligence and governance check and balance, and advice was provided that there was no conflict in
Was that
those roles.
in writing, that advice?
If I can
Can't
perhaps
really-
clarify
can't
that,
really talk on behalf of legal.
because it wasn't Tim. We had the verbal advice that from Heritage New South Wales that they had legal advice that there could not be or was not a conflict by the very nature of Heritage New South Wales being part of government. The council has asked for that advice in writing. We have not yet got it.
And the concern, if I could put it in simple layman's terms, is if the same agency is proposing a major development which impacts upon on the heritage property, that there's a potential conflict if that same agency is providing the advice about the heritage values of the property for the purpose of listing.
In essence, yes.
And that hasn't been resolved yet in terms of formal written advice to the Heritage Council yet?
We have not got the formal written advice. We anticipate getting that hopefully fairly soon.
Ms Foy, if you have the advice, that it would appear that the advice, at least the Heritage Council, is that there is legal advice. Could you provide that to the committee?
I don't have the advice. I'm happy to look into it. If I can say, ministers of the Crown deal with complex issues all of the time. There are particular protections in place through the Act and through our operating policies to make sure there's independence. But I would not suggest in any way there's any conflict at all. And if there's advice to that effect, I'll take advice and on the basis of providing it to the committee.
Mr. Schumer, can we go back to the nomination of the Ultimo site? Now, my understanding is that the National Trust nominated the whole site for listing.
No, their actual nomination with the delineated area which they recommended as the core was what was ultimately considered by the Heritage Council and actually gazetted by the Minister. They did talk about other values on the site, one of them being the adaptive reuse of the site as a key landmark museum project and the work of Lionel Glendenning, a very respected architect, and they also talked generally to values around social significance and attachment to the museum. But they didn't frame those other elements up succinctly. The main thrust was the engineering and historical importance of the former powerhouse functions. That was the key thrust of their nomination in 2015, late 2015.
Sorry, I'm not sorry, I'm not following. So the nomination by the National Trust was was it for the whole site?
Chairman, if I might.
Can you clarify, because I've read things that contradict what?
The National Trust lodged 3 separate nominations
Okay,
for parts of, and the final nomination for all of what is commonly known as the powerhouse site. The 2015 nomination was essentially the core site as currently listed and as pretty much listed on the LEP. I think later in 2019, they lodged a nomination by itself for the Harwood building, and then either also in late 2019 or early 2020 lodged a further nomination for the entire site in common parlance.
okay.
We can certainly table that document. It was in the public domain as at the time of the assessment. One of the things a nominator is required to do on the Heritage Council's nomination form is to have an attempt at the values against the 7 criteria in which values they think as a nominator might be the most robust. But they're also required to delineate an area, what's known in heritage terms as a curtilage, and the curtilage is fundamentally the main capture of the site that is then assessed, because that's the area the proponent said those elements, those structures in this case, are the most significant in their mind, and that's what was progressed as a process.
The
Now-
curtilage sets the boundaries.
Boundary, yes, effectively. What they would see is an effective boundary to protect the values that they've articulated through the nomination form.
Now, what is the impact of having state heritage listing versus Sydney City Council listing? What are the restrictions that, I guess,
Are alleviated.
Pardon?
Are alleviated if you move down from state to
That's, yes. Thank you, David.
It actually works the other way. It enhances the protections by being
how
on the
so?
State Heritage Register. It means that any change, whether it's conservation works or adaptive reuse or any new elements in that curtilage in that listed area comes through an IDA, integrated development process under the Planning Act, and requires the consent of the Heritage Council or its delegate before the local council can determine.
Didn't Mr. Howarth say that if something didn't meet state heritage listing, that in fact it could be, this is my word, not his, it could be downgraded or meet a lower level with Sydney?
It could be locally listed.
Could be locally listed.
You can have a range of listing levels on a particular site, and the Parramatta North side is an example where there's national listing for a element, there's state listing for almost an aligned element, and then there's a local listing. So a site can have multiple layers of legislative protection, and each of those has a different sort of
So if you were a property developer, what would be the listing that you would prefer to have? Sydney City Council listing or state heritage listing?
I don't think
Next
Mr
speculation.
Smith can put himself in the shoes of a property developer, to be perfectly honest.
Okay, well, if you were then going to value a site for resale, what would be the one that you would prefer to get maximum dollar for value?
You want to turn him into a valuer now instead of a
I
property.
certainly wouldn't be drawn on being a valuer
No,
of property or
Or
real
just feel
estate
free to
development.
opine on a variety of things.
Well, he may well feel
That
free.
as an
Sydney Business
expert.
Chamber, so you know.
I would just reiterate.
Roger would have given us an opinion.
Sorry, Committee, I would just reiterate that the different tiers of heritage protection have a particular role and responsibility there to manage values that have been identified at particular levels. Some values on a site might be to the local landscape character or streetscape character. There might be elements on the site which have a higher value of importance to the people of New South Wales, which is the test for State Heritage Register listing, hence the bar I was mentioning. And then there's national and world above that. And each has different threshold for triggers and consents.
The long and the short of it is, state heritage listing limits what you can do in terms of development on the site, doesn't it, Mr.
I would
Smith?
absolutely, no, it would not, we issue permits, over 1,700 a year to state-listed assets, and nearly all of those get approved, with conditions sometimes to manage that change, but we certainly see the value of heritage as being active in the community and part of the community's assets, and to do that, my mantra is lived in and loved, and that's the best way to protect heritage and heritage places.
Now, if you have state heritage listing on a site, is it customary to lift, if you need it, can you in fact lift heritage listing? Is it a process that's easy to go through?
Look,
And does it occur?
local council listings
no,
are
state
heritage.
heritage.
Listing, but certainly for local government, that's a local government matter. And
No,
New
state
South
heritage
Wales.
listing.
State heritage listing. There is a delisting procedure under the New South Wales Heritage Act, and
Does it occur?
very, very rarely. It's usually when a site has either been lost through fire or some cataclysmic event, and to remove it from the register, you have to go through the process. It's all the reverse of the listing. And occasionally, it is used as an opportunity, as the chair of the Heritage Council said, where there's over-representation, perhaps, through original, the formation of the register from asset registers, and a reassessment with modern views and values on heritage and aspects of heritage value, can find it no longer to be of state significance and wouldn't meet the test in today's assessment.
So, Powerhouse Ultimo on Harris Street, what percentage of that site, as of October the 1st, what percentage has state heritage listing on that site?
I'd have to take that on notice in terms of actual percentage, but it would be in the order of 70%. It would be protected by the state listing, 60 to 70%, I think.
Mr. Howarth, does that fit with your understanding of the site?
Broadly, without measuring it, would be of that scale, yes.
So about 70% of the site.
It's probably more in the order of 60, but I'd have to get a spatial mapping done, but we can do that quite readily.
So between 60 to 70, but you'll take it on notice?
Yeah, it's absolutely taken on notice.
Ms.
Although,
Howard-
sorry, can I just add one
Yeah.
point to that? That's measuring a land area, but there's also an elevation level. So in terms of the scale of the buildings that are captured by that footprint, that is a significant part of the site.
Can you provide both, and can you do a sort of a geographical ground percentage, and then a second, I guess, a 3D approach with topographical?
We could certainly look to it.
It could show something interesting. It could show the dollar value.
I think this is a fishing expedition, but nonetheless, on we go.
How about we look at what we
Cod season's closed.
Why don't you have a look at what's there? No one's asking you to do a
Yeah,
fresh
if-
calculation, measuring the floor space and
Thank you.
the like. Look what's
Yeah,
there.
very happy to
just think
take
there's something around.
what we have, what we can provide. There would no doubt be information, and we'll make sure that is as easy to read as possible.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Ms. Howarth, there's been significant discussion recently about the heritage values of Willow Grove property out at Parramatta. You're aware of Willow Grove?
Oh, yes.
Never heard of it.
It's taken till 2:15 to ask that question.
It's polite to ask, Mr. Howarth, that's all. You'd be aware that there are some proponents who suggest that its heritage value can be protected by demolishing it in its current site and moving it across the river onto a site at North Parramatta. If I could maybe just deal that at a sort of theoretical level, what's the current heritage thinking about what used to be a kind of more common practice of demolishing and rebuilding heritage properties in new sites? What's the current heritage thinking about that as an idea?
I'll respond to that very strictly as a sort of in general hypothetical and without any reference to Willow Grove. The general view would be to move a building from its original site diminishes its heritage significance.
And in terms of the process of moving a building that was built 150 years ago or 140 or 130 years ago, given the fabric of that building, is it a question of just pulling it apart like a Lego set and then rebuilding it block by block on the other side, or do you inherently do damage to the property?
Look, I'm not at all qualified to provide those sort of technical assessments, so I would rather not provide a view on that.
Well, in terms of Willow Grove itself, do you think that, do you have any views about whether or not demolishing it at its current site and rebuilding Willow Grove in the Cumberland or North Parramatta precinct, do you have any idea about how much that would cost?
The council, the Heritage Council, has no view on that. It has not been approached on that. It hasn't considered that question.
Well, given your heritage expertise, Have you been engaged in that kind of project before, the demolition and rebuild?
No, I haven't, but again, that's a hypothetical, but I haven't, no.
Mr. Smith, have you undertaken any studies about the demolition and rebuild of Willow Grove?
No, Heritage New South Wales certainly hasn't. We have no remit in terms of that that precinct, that property, and have no management role under that other than archaeology controls.
It feels like Goldilocks, you know, too hot, still a little bit too warm. Maybe it's just right with you, Ms. Foy. Ms. Foy, have you undertaken any studies
been called
about the prospect of demolishing Willow Grove in its current site and moving it across the river?
Yeah, look, at the risk of being the third bear, the matter of any matter associated with moving anything, any works that happens on the powerhouse side of Parramatta is within the domain of Infrastructure New South Wales. So should there be, again, hypothetically, should there be any decision about a relocation or otherwise of any asset on a property, the delivery agency would be the one to do it, and they would have to comply with whatever the planning controls are in terms of assessment.
So I think we can be clear that...
Please, I'm not obfuscating, but I am trying to be clear.
No. So as I understand the position, Infrastructure New South Wales has approached none of the Heritage Council or Heritage New South Wales or Create New South Wales for any advice about the heritage impact of moving Willow Grove. Is that right? You're all nodding?
That's correct.
All right.
Any more
That would be a
questions?
matter for Heritage, any works they've done, so I'd refer it to them.
Yeah, no.
Oh, sorry, Heritage, beg your pardon.
I think
Infrastructure New South Wales, beg
I'm
your
tempted
pardon.
to ask, but no.
No, I'm sure you.
I realise time's expired, but I can keep going if you
No,
want.
come on.
No.
Keep going.
All righty, thanks very much for coming today. I don't think anything was taken on notice.
Yes, there
was.
were.
Okay.
Yes, there was.
I don't know who that was, but
That was the...
The percentages, the measuring up the
Okay,
tape
thank you.
measures.
Yeah, the
But
quantum at
Walt really
Heritage
wants it in
space
bold
in Ultimo.
type in one line so it can fit on the...
On the press release.
can we...
Thank you. And can you email it to me directly, please?
That'll be out there with a
Order,
message this
order.
afternoon.
You heard what I said in the last... the committee will be in... The secretary will be in contact with you 21 days to return. Thank you very much.
No, pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
so much.
Thank you.